Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian, and I'm about to go make some Doom levels, which is gonna be a bit of a change of pace from what I assume you're used to for those of you who actually watch this channel. Because it's no secret, I'm a bit of an adventure games kind of guy, and it's the sort of games that, well, let's be honest, it's the sort of games I'm good at. Well, not really good at. At least I am not as catastrophically awful at them as I am with pretty much every other genre of games. That goes for RPGs, RTS, FPS, and all the other acronyms you can think of. Platformers included, but that's not an acronym. And yet, I quite like Doom, and by Doom I mean the old Doom, the 1993 Doom. I have sort of a soft spot for that. But I also have a very difficult history with it, and I'll try to explain as best as I can, but stick with me, this is gonna get a bit windy. Now, I think I grew up at the best time pertaining to the sort of digital entertainment that was available to us, because I was a child in the 80s, and in the late 80s that's when the Commodore 64 was at its peak. So we had a Commodore 64 and I grew up with that, and just the idea of computer games, digital entertainment, games that you could play inside and not have to be outside where it's cold and it's dank and there are people and screw them, and also I don't like sports or climbing trees or any of that shit. I can just sit inside and have fun in front of a TV and get really wonky vision and be a terrible social case, really. That was awesome, and we didn't really care what type of games there were. They were just games. You could have a shoot 'em up, or you could have a platformer, or you could even have a graphical adventure game. Yes, they did exist on the Commodore 64. They were all awful. And so were most of the other games, now that I think about it. We never really got very far in any of them. The joysticks kept breaking when we were playing track and field. Anyway, so it didn't really matter to us what kind of games they were just computer games. And then I enter adolescence around, 12 or 13, and the IBM PC 386 enters my house. And so I sort of grew up as the gaming industry grew up, some might say. And again, we weren't terribly picky about what types of games there were, although the delineation between the different genres was becoming a lot more pronounced. So now we knew that, oh, this is a shooting game, this is a platformer game, this is an adventure game, and they were all taking off and evolving in, very, very different ways. In the old Atari days, you could have a game like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was, I guess, kind of an action-adventure game hybrid, although hybrids didn't exist back then, it was just a computer game. But by the early 90s, games were starting to develop their own identities, and game genres especially were starting to develop their own identities. So I fell into the camp of adventure games because I enjoyed the pace of adventure games. I've never been a terribly competitive person, so I just said I didn't like sports at all, and I enjoyed adventure games. Single-player experiences, but not really, because I would usually have a friend over, or if I was very lucky, two friends, and we would sit and finish adventure games together, so they were very much an inclusive genre to us, at least. But the whole idea of competitive gaming, beating high scores was one thing, playing against an opponent was another thing, and I was never terribly good at it. And then early 90s, Doom comes out. 1993 to be exact. Now this must have been around the time when I got my first 486. And it was a beast. And it actually ran Doom really, really well. And here's the kicker. I really, really like Doom. I remember playing Doom with my brother and my best friend from school. My best friend would bring his computer over, or my brother would bring his computer into my room, and we'd hook those bad boys up with a serial cable, ask your dad, to play two-player Doom against each other. And then things evolved, and it came to a point where I believe, like in the mid-90s, 94, 95, every weekend, my brother and I were over at one of my friends from school. We were over at his apartment, really, well, his parents' apartment, but in his room with our 3 computers all hooked up to this little mini network, and we were playing Doom, and Quake had just come out, so we were playing Quake as well. We were playing against each other, there were shouting matches, and mice were flying through the room, but it was all in the heat of the moment. We weren't winning anything, we certainly weren't winning any competitions, and we certainly weren't getting into esports because that was not a thing yet. It was just 3 idiots in a room playing games instead of talking to girls. But around the same time as Doom comes out, a thing starts happening with games and the games world in general. And that is that publishers of computer games, and some might even say developers too, but publishers especially, get into their heads that because Doom and deathmatching over modems and local area networks is such a big thing, and it's going to get even bigger, and they were right about that, every game that comes out must now be a 3D FPS. Or, if not that, it must at least include some sort of arcadey, twitch reflexy, 3D, very important 3D, kind of bullshit in order to sell. And by sell, we mean we won't publish it unless it meets these criteria. Adventure games? Well, they're kind of passé, aren't they? They're kind of those solitary, sad, basement-dwelling, single-player experiences that are reserved for those kind of weirdos who read books and don't really care much for human interaction and don't play sports. And I'm not here, it sounds a bit like I am being very, very rude and unnecessarily shallow, and that might be because I am. But I do realize that not all players of Doom fall into that category, and Doom itself is not a game that necessarily caters to that category of people. I'm saying that the publishers of the time thought they were. And what really annoyed me about that is that all the games that I grew up loving and the games that I gravitated towards, no points for guessing what kind of games they were somewhat pushed aside, some might say killed, or let's be frank and say viciously maimed to the point of where they were just crawling around in a pool of their own blood by the wave of 3D games. And some might also say the demographic for computer games was altered somehow. But I do think it's a fallacy to think that adventure games were these mature people who played these literary experiences, and in comes all these kids with their 3D shotguns and their multiplayers and their... What is all this nonsense? I don't think that's fair either, because let's be honest, me growing up playing adventure games, I was a kid. Me playing Wolfenstein 3D for the first time, me making a map in Wolfenstein 3D for the first time, me even playing Doom for the first time. I was still a kid, and I was still a hungry little kid who still by this point didn't really care what type of game it was, as long as it was a computer game. I had my preference, sure, but that didn't stop me from playing Doom or One Must Fall 20,937. I can always forget the number at the end of that one. Played Warcraft 2 against friends. Even tried my hand at StarCraft, although sucking quite terribly at it. Played all of those games, really. All different types of games. I just happen to gravitate, I mean, usually you would happen to gravitate towards stuff that you can actually do comfortably and not be really crap at. But publishers of the mid-90s were under the assumption that nothing will ever sell if it is not 3D and if it does not have some sort of twitch, arcadey, shooty, or otherwise wild thrill ride behind it. And the sort of people who started showing up to these LAN events. Now, by the mid-90s, my brother and I were going to these big LAN parties. You got 200, 250 people all huddled together in a room. Most of us were playing Doom and Quake. And Quake 2, I think Quake 2 had just come out around that time when we started going to these events regularly, and it was all in good fun. And the type of people who started showing up around the mid-90s were of a different ilk. And they would unpack their computers, sit down, look at their watch intently, not interacting with anyone else, just waiting for the Counter-Strike competition to start. They would play, and they would look really intense. And then once the whole thing was done, they would pack up their computers and leave. And not stick around for the social shit, not stick around to play other games or make new friends or participate in any of the creative competitions, you know. Long story short, that sort of killed the fun for me. And now we've got these big arenas where people play League of Legends and whatever else we've got, big stadium, ESPN coverage and all of this shit. Have it! I have the utmost respect for people who can make a living off of this and go to these events and have fun with it. It's not really my scene, to be honest. And again, I think this comes back to me not being a very competitive person and actually not really being very good at being competitive. So with that, I think what I'm trying to get at with all of this rambly nonsense is there was a time at the end of the 90s especially, and for a good 10, maybe 15-year period, I just stopped playing games entirely. Because there were no games coming out that I wanted to play. Publishers especially, and these are the ones I actually hold accountable for this, publishers demanded that if it wasn't a certain type of game, then let's not even bother with it at all. And I know this is not true for the entire world because, as Ron Gilbert famously said, adventure games didn't actually die, they just went on holiday in Germany, and a lot of German publishers were still into 2D point-and-click games. I was not aware of it at that time, and also I don't speak very good German. So there was that period of time where I was just completely checked out of it, and I think the thing I'm actually getting at is it's very easy to blame all of that on Doom. Because Doom was when that shift started. Doom was when you started meeting people who were more interested in what graphics card they had in their computer than what was actually on their computer. It started becoming more of a dick-waving contest, and by the end of the 90s, I was just fed up with it. There were no games left for me to play, there were no social gatherings for me to go to that wasn't full of jackasses, and I just could not give less of a shit. So I went off and got a degree and a job and just sort of every once in a while fired up a Space Quest game and sort of pined for the good old days. And it was just a matter of time before I would start hanging out on a porch in my underwear with a sawn-off shotgun going, "Let me tell you about them damn years when we played real games." This is a whiskey bottle. And I'm just chugging at the neighborhood kids. Actually, that is a scary thought. So I'm glad, first of all, I'm glad that adventure games are a niche genre and there's this underground movement that has been going on since the mid-2000s that I wasn't even aware of until way, way late in the game. And adventure games are no longer a pariah. Publishers no longer have that gatekeeping magic powers over us that they used to have. If you want to make an adventure game and sell it, you can make it yourself, publish it yourself. There's Steam, there's GOG, there's itch.io, there's everything. You don't have to conform to anyone's rules, man. And in fact, I think we're kind of back to that old school feeling of, you know what, it's not as important what kind of game it is, as long as it's a computer game, as long as it has elements that I like. And if I don't like it, well, then I can go and get something else. Back to this whole thing with Doom. I've always enjoyed level editors and I've always enjoyed making stuff in other games. I used to dick around in hex editors and just change little odd bits of text in my favorite games just to see what would happen. Usually it would just crash, but every once in a while you got lucky and you could just change some dialogue in games and shit like that. I always liked tinkering with stuff. Doom. I've always wanted to make levels in Doom, and back in the mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s, I actually tried making Doom levels with the tools available at the time. Let's remember, the source code was not hadn't been released yet, but there were editors for Doom, and they were clunky. I mean, and to be fair, they also were a little too advanced for me at age, what, 15, 16? Certainly couldn't wrap my head around sectors and line depths and all that. I remember making levels for Duke Nukem 3D, which was easier because it had that visual editor. You could just go in as you're editing the level and look around and align textures and put down objects and such. And now you can do the same with Doom Builder, which is the editor I just happened to stumble upon. And now I'm excited, and I've you know, tested it out. I've made my first level. It has a working door in it, has a working lift in it, and even has a working teleporter in it, which I think are like the 3 important bits you need for a Doom map to work. Well, that and, you know, levels and textures and monsters and shit, but like those 3 advanced, super advanced things, really. I even have a wall that comes down when you hit a switch. So proud of that. So I'm excited to make Doom levels, and I guess if I've given the impression in the past that I somehow blame Doom for the death of adventure games, I want to clarify that one, because while you could easily point the finger at Doom for the decline, and some might even say death of adventure games, at least that headline still rears its head from time to time, you can certainly point to Doom as the genesis of all that, but it wasn't Doom's fault. Doom, it could have been any other game, really. So it's not Doom's fault. Doom is a great game. I love Doom. I love playing Doom. I suck at it, but I love playing it. And I love tinkering with it. I love making levels for it. I have now discovered the love of level editing that eluded me as a 16-year-old teenager. So I guess if you take anything away from this, it's, well, that, really. I'm the Space Quest Historian. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, do whatever you kids do. Do leave me a comment, because I quite enjoy the comments. What were your experiences growing up? What kind of games did you play? What was the scene like when you grew up and started playing games? Were there like specific categories of people playing specific categories of games, or was it just like a free-for-all? Because I grew up in a free-for-all, and then it became very categorized. Fucking publishers. So let me know. Thanks. I'll see you around the Chrono Stream.